Um, Also, I was going to outline the Isotope Insight 2 manual, but for some reason they decided to do this really weird web browser thing, and the organization of it is actually is like actual garbage. Like I couldn't even reformat it correctly. Um, so we'll kind of be following along with that when we talk about some of the stuff with Insight today, because Insight 2 has a free trial. So you should go and cop that if you are trying to use Insight. Why is it good? Because it is universal. So again, like we have Voxengo stuff and all the other free metering stuff. Essentially, it's all going to be exactly the same. So if you're used to Voxengo, I would say follow along with that. Um, but for the most part, we're going to be using Insight just because it has really, really cool metering effects and meter tapping. Um, in Isotope Insight, the original one, um, it had this thing called a meter tap. You can go and put them on each channel and stuff, and then be able to see each of your tracks in a spectrogram. All right, so today we're going to be really talking about what decibels mean. So I'm sure everybody kind of knows the general idea on that. Um, general idea is decibels measure how loud shit is. That is the overall general idea about a decibel. But there's different decibels for different mediums because a decibel is measuring sound pressure. So sound pressure is the way you measure audio in a real environment, in an analog environment, because you're working with, you know, actual waveforms that are moving around in a space. So more loudness in a room, more sound pressure. I actually have a whole section here about ear health as well, because we kind of brought it up last week. And I want to give you guys some more like WebMD kind of information about that, because sound pressure and pressure in general, pressure changes, all that influences your ears. So our ears pick up sound through this pressure change. When the pressure changes, it vibrates the cilia on our ear drums, and then those pick up sound, translate it to our brain. So that's a transducer. So if it's overpressurized or it vibrates too quickly and starts to rupture, then you'll lose hearing entirely, or you'll just have cilia on your ears die. So we need to understand what decibels mean and what dBSPL and dBFS mean as well in order to understand how to really kind of like both mix, look at meters, use meters effectively, as well as really understand how even just the Fletcher-Munson curve works. So we've talked about the Fletcher-Munson curve already. And we're going to be briefly talking about proximity effects. Proximity effect is going to be something that we're going to talk about pretty much every single week, just because it's a huge thing in audio engineering, just in general. If you're going to be using a mic, if you're going to be creating effects for impacts, for any type of push dynamic change, dynamics are all based on that as well. And all that has to do with metering as well, because it's about how audio changes over time and what type of change does our ear even hear. Perceived loudness. How do we hear loudness in a space? So all that shit's important because it is really just geared around be able to understand audio. It's kind of like if audio was telling you something besides frequency, it's amplitude, and this is a language to understand that amplitude. Okay, so I have a couple different articles I outlined here for you guys and also link them out. Um, I like this article because it nicely laid out what all this stuff kind of means. So before we talk about this, I'm sure you know these two definitions about reading amplitude. So peak and RMS. So those are the general, kind of like things you're going to be looking at. you're not going to be seeing dBFS or dBSPL exactly when you're reading meters inside of a DAW or inside of a plugin. You're just going to be seeing peak or RMS. So, peak measures the momentary loudness, and the momentary loudness can be changed because of which frequency is triggering it. So say if your peak is reading at -3, but it doesn't sound that loud. Maybe your low end is too loud, and so now your meter is reading the peak of your low end first, and then giving you that readout only. Same problem can happen when reading RMS if you have too much low end, because that has more power. So RMS, root mean squared, shows you the average level of the incoming signal. Similar to LUFS, which is LUFS, but not exactly. LUFS is a little bit smarter than that. It's a smarter algorithm for reading signal over time. Loudness unit full scale. That's what it's talking about. And dBFS stands for full scale as well. Decibel full scale. So, whenever we're reading audio, have to keep in mind that in a digital medium, we are always reading dBFS. In an analog medium, meaning the real world, we're reading dBSL, SPL. So a Pascal is another way to measure it. That's the hardware version to, actually meter this. So when you're doing calculations, 0 dBSPL equals 20 UPA, or 20 micropascals. Science, math, fucking irrelevant. All right, so we don't need to know all this stuff. Say if you're trying to get into DSP, this is 1000% the thing. So it's pretty interesting when doing this kind of stuff, because it's going to drastically change the way you kind of approach a mix as well. Okay, so talked about peak signal, RMS, dBSPL, dBFS. So decibels full scale to sound pressure. All right, so that's the kind of dB we're going to be working with. So there's other types of dB, and these are specifically for voltage. So when you talk about dBu, electric tension per volt, that is like a Eurorack system. When we're in dBFS, it's measuring bits. So the full scale, what they're talking about with full scale, is -0. 0 being the top and everything being in relation to that point. So that's what's called unity gain. And it has that laid out over here, as well as kind of like a little definition on each dBu or dB type, which is really cool, having all this stuff in one nice little place. Also, if you go and get that Art of Mastering book by Bobcats, there's a lot of stuff about this as well. So, why is it important if you understand dBFS and all that stuff, just in reference to what we're talking about here? And that really has to do with this. Just to skip to this part over here. We're going to be kind of moving back and forth. So the Fletcher-Munson curve tells us what our ears hear more prominently in dBSPL. So dBSPL is analog in a medium real world stuff. So that means at 0, 0 here means unity gain, noise floor, super, super quiet. And then everything else is plus that. So when we're listening to and mixing audio, what we want is to be around 87. Why? Because this is the probably most gentle curve that you can actually mix in, because our ears are hearing it like this at this dB. Does the Fletcher-Munson curve apply differently to digital mediums? Okay, so that's a good question, because we're talking about perceived loudness. So when you're working in a digital medium, what you want is a flat response. And then in the analog medium, you want to be mixing along this noise profile, which means this loud. You mix this loud to hear these frequencies like this. So when we're mixing, say if we are hearing shrillness, something that's a little bit too much, it's probably because it's around 2K up to 5K, which is pretty much the sensitivity range for hearing a baby crying. So both males and females are very sensitive to that. Females are more sensitive to that just because of biology, but it also makes them a little bit more, I guess, dialed for being a mixing engineer because they're a little bit more sensitive to that area. And that's, again, supported by science. You can go and check more of that stuff out. But really, so equal loudness is saying this is just generally how loud it is. It's a generalized version of this loudness. But, so like if you were just measuring it with a perfect measuring system, our ears are not perfect. Our brain isn't perfect. It's all analog. So this is the way it should look and should sound when it's this loud. And anything above 90 is pain. So you shouldn't be really listening above that level without ear plugs of some type. But yeah, so the blue line is telling us how our ears hear. So the Fletcher-Munson curve shown blue for comparison. So equal loudness curve is not the same as the Fletcher-Munson curve. And then on top of that, we have a bunch of articles and stuff. So this article, if you're really curious about the Fletcher-Munson curve and some of the history behind it, this is really interesting stuff just because it talks about the necessity for it. So not only was it necessary for people to have this to go and measure loudness with just hearing it, but it also allowed people to go and design for loudness. And this also goes along with the Nyquist theorem, which allows us to go and calculate samples per second. So all this stuff kind of comes into play here. Okay, so when we're working with, just to kind of recover it, DBFS is going to be every digital medium, recording level of the audio interface, DAW channel volume. So that's what we're looking at when we're looking at each individual channel. We're looking at a DBFS version of that. So now we're in floating point. So DBFS, because it's reading bits and it's controlling the audio with bit depth. That means if I pull down this without floating point math. So floating point math shifts around that full scale. It says, now you've moved unity gain. So now we shift the noise floor. So it's like a cup size that's varying where it starts and ends. So if it was like it was before, which is 32-bit fixed, then it says noise floor is neg 144, neg 96 based on your bit depth, and now you're shrinking the top of the cup, and so you're reducing the amount of bits. So that is a direct result because of DBFS, because DBFS is reading bits. So they need to create floating point math in order to shift around that noise floor. So noise floor is unity. That's what they're talking about here. A value in decibel is always translatable into a real value in the unit you are comparing it with. So each of these different values will have a different unity. So where is 0? And what does 0 mean for this scale? So again, like I just said, DBSPL is using 0 as a noise floor, as the bottom point, as the quietest signal. Anything below that is negative values. But when we're talking about DBFS, everything is negative. Everything is below 0, because 0 is this. This is unity gain for our master. So whenever we're measuring anything in here, it's always going to be in a neg dB relationship. So that's really important because it also allows us to kind of utilize some I guess, theories and practices on how to actually hear increments of change with decibels. So we hear increments of change a little bit differently. It's all logarithmic and exponential. So I have a couple, charts here that kind of talk about that over here. But yeah, just to kind of like keep on this path here. So if you're curious more about the zero, it has a little bit more about that right here. So everything I just said right here about DBFS, and this is actually something you're going to see. This is why I included it. So dBVU, so volume units. So dBVU is a way that a hardware piece of gear reads incoming signal. So that means that at that 0 point, so if we had a VU meter up, I can go and find one in a second here, but a VU meter will kind of look kind of like the glue compressor. Or let's actually load the 2500 API. Okay, so we have a couple different types of VU meters here. So we have the gain reduction GR. We have input and output as well. So input is what we're kind of talking about here, because we're saying that this is the noise floor of this VU meter, so the volume unit. So it's saying that this is the range where you'll start to hear some saturation. It has 2 meters because it's stereo. So once you cross neg 3 and start approaching 0, you'll start to add distortion. And so that is what this meter is directly talking about in every single situation. VU meters are measuring the level and start point of natural analog saturation. There are also ways to read, amplitude or whatever, but really that's its practice now and really what it's being used for. So I think that's pretty interesting, just because now you can go and apply certain things like that. Just like what I was saying here, this is GR. If we are looking in glue compressor or anything else that has this kind of readout, glue compressor has a plugin counterpart called glue comp, or the glue by Cytomic. Same company made this. So this is only reading gain reduction. So the minute you start to reduce gain, it will tell you you're reducing 0 to 20 dB of gain. And that's kind of the overall general idea with that. So again, once you hit this red line, you will start to create distortion. And that's a desired effect in a lot of hardware interfaces, but definitely just something to know. What is it doing? Why is it doing that? So this whole explanation here talks about exactly what I'm talking about here. So it's saying pretty much that all these volts kind of like sum up, and once they hit that 0 point, it's saying that it's going to start capping it off and creating saturation. Okay, so a ton of different stuff here. Ton of different, representations of decibels. We have the voltage version. We have, we have like 3 or 4 voltage versions, including a watt version. Decibels per watt is a way to measure ohmage. If anybody knows about live sound, ohmage is the way to do things. Your headphones are at micro ohms, and a live speaker is at 4 to 16, depending on how much wattage needs to be distributed. And different cables travel with different levels of wattage. So you need power amps, other things to step stuff up. Okay, so a lot of cool stuff, I guess, man. But overall, I think you should definitely read through this and kind of just get to know what dB is. Again, we're going to be working with dBFS for the most part. And when you're inside of A DAW, you're always working with dBFS. So, how do we apply dBSPL? This is why I included this example here. So say if we were creating a live scene, this is how we would set up that balance. And to that point of proximity effects, they have a little experiment here where they're taking two people at different heights and then using the subtraction between their heights to kind of calculate how they would perceive loudness differently based on how tall they are. Good question. Do cables travel better if they have gold tips? Gold is really just used because it's doesn't oxidize as easily as other types of metal. It's more conductive, so that means that it will just always work consistently and for the most part, unless you go and give it the guillotine, which is accidentally dropping a cymbal on a cable and chopping it inside of itself. Honestly, with headphones, just trust that the headphone companies know what they're doing with ohmage. But if you are going to go and plug your headphones into something that is pushing out more than a micro ohm, you will blow up your headphones. That's something to keep in mind. Yeah, I have an actual answer for that. Also, fun fact about cables, Monster Cable used to sell their cables by taking one cable that they would flip the phase on. So they have a flip phase on one cable, and then they have their Monster Cable. So they just have like a generic whatever cable and say, this is a regular cable. Plug it in, it has flip phase, so it sounds like shit. Tinny, most of the sound is like gone. It's like, it's garbage. Now listen to the Monster Cable. Ooh, wow, full sound, not phased out. They got called out on it. Had to stop doing that. That is false advertising. Okay, so interesting stuff. So we don't really need to know that two people at different heights will perceive loudness differently, but if we were trying to create a real scene, we do have to create the depth that they are both getting from that perceived loudness. So from the Fletcher-Munson curve, just knowing that we are going to need more amplitude and more power to hear lower frequencies. So that means mid-range is going to be the most prominent. It's going to be what our ears are just kind of guided to first. And you know, perceived loudness is kind of weird because it's almost like a psychoacoustic effect where we're actually perceiving this stuff because of the medium we're capturing it with, which is our ears. You know, which is kind of like a mic. Mics hear things a lot differently. So our ears are kind of like very, very high-powered omnidirectional condenser mics that are organic in creation. And then every single other animal's ears are exactly the same way with different grades of hearing. More ciliae. More ciliae, more harmonics. That's how it works. We can't hear over 22K because we literally do not have the appendage to. So that's kind of our limitations with that. All right, so now I want to talk about how we hear changes in amplitude. So this is another article I pieced together here from this other place, Pulsar Instruments. And just understanding how noise affects amplitude and how you perceive amplitude when it's either summed together or changed in amplitude. So we're talking about decibel again, gives you another measurement scale. So near total silence is 0 dB, and we're talking about SPL. So remember, this is plus that 0. You can add a neg in front of it, but it's really just talking about this is this, not neg 60. 0 dB SPL is near total silence. Guess what happens if you have total silence? Your body is not ready for that. A bunch of functions with your body will shut down if you have complete silence. Like a deprivation chamber can make people go insane, literally because it's so silent. You start to hear the internal sounds of your brain and your body, and that stuff fucks people up. A lot of info on that. It's just those hyperbaric chambers are not safe for people to really be in. Just because you're not supposed to be in total silence. That's just how it works. Like if you're in a deprivation tank, it's different. You're hearing all the, your body floating in water. That's taking up a good deal of sound. And the proximity effects of the splashing and moving of water could technically bring that water noise to about 60 dB, 45 dB. It's kind of like when you, uh, you know, looking at a TV or whatever, you kind of get the same perspective of looking at a 10-inch TV up close from looking at a 100-inch TV from 10 feet away. So, exactly the same effect, proximity. We see things and they scale differently based on how close we are to it. Okay, so now here's about the doubling of sound energy. So this is just kind of talking about the level of clarity in our ears. So it cannot distinguish between 10 billion pins and 10 billion and one pins, or even 10 billion 100 million pins, because it's not a linear device, so it logarithmically bunches stuff together. So that's why our ears kind of deceive us in a lot of different ways, create effects to be intelligible, use them effectively. Also, over, I guess, our entire humanity existence, we've been, evolving. Every single sense of ours has been dialed for something that we need. So if we don't need that level of hearing, we won't use it. If we need to hear specific things, we will kind of adapt towards that, which is, again, like the baby crying. We always need to hear the baby crying. The baby's crying, we don't live forever because we need kids to live. So obviously that's a biological imperative that we have that stuff in our ears. But now talking about change in dB, change over time, change in level. So if we're EQing, and I've talked about this before, we hear increments of change in 3 dB. So when we push it by 3 dB, sound energy is doubled. And we decrease, sound energy is halved. When we decrease by 10, sound energy increased by 10, sound energy is increased by a factor of 10, so times 10, not plus 10. Does that make sense? I wonder if anybody's confused right now. So because this is exponential, if the building block is a 3, then this is going to be times 2. And then once we get up to 10, now we're timesing by 10. We're not adding 10. We can be adding 10 if we go and, literally are looking at the numbers and just push it by 10. But perceived loudness is going to hear it 10 times louder. Not just plus 10 dB. So then exponential, 20 dB by a factor of 100. So 100 times louder when you push it by 20 dB. And vice versa. So exactly to what I just said, which is this is exponential. So instead of being linear, so if it was linear means, yeah, exactly. Linear is always one after another, consecutive, exactly. Logarithmic, exponential. All right, so now how to add decibels together. So we're talking about summing now. What happens when we sum two things together? So if sound energy is doubled, if then if we have two sounds at 90 dB, 90 dB plus 90 dB equals 93 dB. Bruv. Mind melted. Why? Because sound energy is doubled when you add 3 dB. So 90 plus 90 is times 2. So that means it would be 93 dB of perceived loudness. This would be 93 dB SPL. Two plus 2 equals 5, bro. But that's 1000% true with what Galva just said there. So if you had 2 dB plus 2 dB, you would actually equal 5 dB. Because you're timesing 2 by 2, you get double that. So a 3 dB increase. All right, so now, this is kind of another way to divide or add noises together. Just kind of think of it like, when you go and add two signals together and they're offset by a certain amount. So this is not as important. The most important thing is this. You must understand how sound energy doubles. A 69 in the chat, that is the 1. That is the number. But 69 plus 69 dB equals 72. Add 7 plus 2 equals 9. It all leads back to 3, man. 420, Wu-Tang, 36 chambers, all that. Okay, so this is always going to be an additional kind of thing added onto 0. But, 0 being where they are originating. So the difference between the two noise levels. So if there's 0 difference between the two noise levels, meaning 90 plus 90, we're going to have 3 dB of change. So if there's an offset by any of these amounts, then it'll sum plus this amount of dB. So we can use this as a chart to literally sum things together and then manage how much their perceived loudness is changing. When they sum together into a meter, how much more amplitude am I getting from that? So that means if I put two sounds that are exactly the same source, so meaning they're exactly in phase. So say if I was mastering, and this is a mastering thing, literally all this shit is leading towards mastering. If you don't understand this with mastering, like, you're not even mastering. You're literally just putting a cap on your loud mix. But also mixing as well, mixing really, really effectively. A lot of people, have this kind of like technique down by default, and they can just kind of work with it, because it's, again, all based on how we actually hear things. So people trust their instincts and say, I like it where it's at right there, or I just double everything when I want it to be twice as loud. Just by default, then you'll understand this because it'll be like explaining why certain things have been working that way when you're mixing. So, hence why when I said when you're going to go and start up a rough mix, which is the whole end of this course, 101, if you go and just drag all your tracks down by, 5 to 10 dB, all of your balancing is going to be shifted. So if you're going to set up a mix, you got to set it up from, a low point, sum it up to about -6, and then make sure everything has its presence. So that's kind of the point of like knowing how to mix, because if you don't, then everything's always loud, everything's always smashed into the limiter, and it's not really getting what you want out of the mix. Hence why I even loaded up this track here, and I'll show you guys that in a second here, because we're about to get into insight. So the last point here about dB is we have dBA and dBc, and this is called A weighting or C weighting. And A weighting is pretty much the general, so it's going to be sensitive to 500 to 6K. So this is linear. It's going to be pretty much all the frequencies. We're usually reading dBA, but C weighting is for lower frequencies, so like an LFE kind of response or anything else like that. They also have different meters specifically to go and find C weighted audio. So C weighting is really good for 5.1 sound and for anything that's dealing with kind of like sending out multiple channels. So if you're going to build a monitor, like a monitor with a tweeter and a cone, then you'd have to C weight your cone while A weighting your tweeter, and then factor in a bunch of other uh, dBu and dBV, you know, I guess weightings. So like with that kind of stuff, it's really, really temperamental. You'll just blow shit up if you don't do the right calculation. Literally everything will just break. Okay, so that's that. dB is fun, I guess, but it really is just like super useful because we have all this control over how we perceive loudness. If you understand how all this stuff works, then it's going to make it easier to EQ stuff and also mix. Because the most important part of mixing is volume and pan. So if you don't understand how actual volume works, meaning dB, which is the increment of volume, then you're not using it effectively. You're just kind of using it based off of experience, which definitely can work. But yeah, again, it's going to be harder to judge things, and you're going to be just guessing and checking most of the time. Say if like you heard something too loud, say like, oh yeah, mix sounds great, bass too loud at blah blah blah, or the bass too loud in this sound here. Pull down 80 hertz by 6 dB. It's like, oh yeah, I want it 4 times as quiet, so I'll pull it back by -6. Or I'll pull it back by -3, I want it half as loud. So those are good spots to start EQing from. Also a good spot to start multi-band compressing to. Multi-band anything. Saturation, you can compress stuff up, you can expand stuff. Now you know how to control and then measure that audio, so you know what to kind of shoot from. Shoot from and for. So LUFS is going to be something we talk about pretty much the rest of the class here. But this little excerpt here I pulled from Sweetwater is actually pretty decent. So again, LUFS stands for loudness unit full scale. So what is LUFS reading? It's reading a general term. So a general like section of audio. It's reading more than RMS. And it even kind of like points that out over here. So it's regardless of whatever peak or RMS are saying, we have a mastering consistent metering system. So they make the point, if you're mastering an entire album and you want it to be uniform in terms of loudness, you got to shoot for 1 LUFS range for each track. So they're talking about -5 to -13, which are like K12 and K6 standards. K6 is kind of the new pop mastering standard, and pop mastering is now at -6 for LUFS. And like a Moody Good track would be like -1.5, -2. So very, very different. But overall, LUFS is reading a summation of time. It's not just reading momentary averaged signals. So what that means is it's actually going to stop reading when you have like a fade out section. And what it's monitoring in that section that it's actually hearing is it's measuring the pretty much dynamic range of the entire track. So what does this number mean? It's saying that between the loudest peak and the quietest peak for a generalized section of time, there's only 5 dB of difference. So that means no dynamics, because we hear increments of change in neg 3 to neg 6, we're not going to really hear that much change, with neg 5. It's going to all sound loud, and if we do have a section where it's actually dynamic, it's going to be really, really, really night and day. So I tend to master to like neg 6, neg 8 nowadays, although certain tracks will call for a certain style of master sometimes. But yeah, just to this little, like, I guess, measuring system. We're talking about LUFS here. A siren at 120, this would be neg 5, and this would be neg 10, and this would be neg 13. So this is how we're hearing all this shit. It's very incremental. So talking about dynamic range, if the LUFS of your live sound, whatever, was crushed and all the dynamic range was gone, you would hear the siren at 100 dB and two people talking at around 90 dB. So then we don't get any depth from that. We don't understand where that person's talking and where they're talking from, how far they're away from us. So if we want to hear dynamics, we want stuff to come from far away, up close, we have to create dynamic change. So inside of like cinematic sound design, you actually have to work with extremely low noise floors. And so you'll actually be just trying to fit it in so it's diegetic. And that means happening on screen. So it looks like it's happening on screen and there's no disconnect there. Okay, so final point here is your ears. Because we talked about LUFS and how that changes stuff. Again, if you haven't seen the movie or documentary, What the Bleep Do We Know, please watch it. Highly relevant to what we're talking about right now, especially if you're going to go and try to understand like the way the brain perceives depth and proximity effect and all that stuff. So is the benefit of having something at neg 1.5 LUFS just that it goes off live since you get no sense of depth? Pretty much. So having something at neg 1.5 LUFS is literally the ability to sound louder on an already mastered system. So that means somebody else's track will outshine that track before by default. Some DJs like even like Skrillex will go and pretty much use unmastered tracks for live and then push it into a limiter. Yeah, no depth is kind of a negative. Again, though, it's all based off of what you're trying to do with it. So if you really want to create like no depth in like a drops, what you got to do is manage the LUFS and sustain the perceived loudness of the drop. And then the rest of the track you make dynamic. So that's the whole point of understanding how to mix, because then you can mix each of your parts individually, get them loud, get them really up front, and then you can have a dynamic breakdown. You can have a dynamic kind of verse section with like some chords and shit, so it's not grating. What's going to happen is you're turning your track into a chainsaw or an angle grinder, power tools. So you're hearing this level of loudness for a long time. So that's grating, also creates ear fatigue almost instantly. The length of time that you can listen, and when we get into mixing, I'll get another chart out here for mixing levels and the amount of time you can mix at that level. At 87, which I said is your homework pretty much, is to get a dB meter and start mixing at 87, is pretty much the best one because it gives you the loudest response while letting you mix on that without fatigue for about 3 to 4 hours. So ideal. If you're a mixing engineer and you're working under the gun for $2,000 an hour, it could be. Then yeah, you gotta be able to execute and not tire yourself out during your session. So 1000% necessary for you to understand that you have to mix at 87 dB, not because turn the fuck down, but because your ears will start to turn the fuck down after a while. So now listening at 95 for 1 hour, you're gonna incrementally start turning it up because now your ears are fatiguing and they're compressing. So I actually made a little notes about that specifically. Um, I believe I have the article for this as well. And this is just a link here. It's like a list of like illnesses and stuff that you can possibly get that will influence your ears. And then I believe I have another one specifically about the Cleveland Clinic ear care. So what I was saying before about, try to not pop your ears so much. It's not going to be like next time you pop your ears, you're going to like damage your shit. It's really just that when you pop your ears, you're like opening up this small sinus opening that like regulates the pressure in your head. And so every time you do that, you kind of shift the pressure in your eardrum canal as well. So the more you do that, the more you're going to be irritating it. So people that pop their ears could potentially get more ear infections because of that. And one of my brothers does that a lot, and he got a bunch of eardrum infections. Is there a method for metering headphone dB output? Yes, there is. You can do that with SonarWorks. How can we measure out 87 dB at home? Download a dB meter on your phone with an app. That's the first way to do it. Then there's a bunch of other dB meters that are, available on Amazon, wherever. But the app is the first place to start. So go for that. Heard people having 2 sets of mixing mastering chains based on the drop and everything else. Yeah, I can totally see that. And what I do sometimes is I'll go and literally modulate the master piece of audio. So the pre-master, I'll go and change sections of amplitude for different parts. I'll even go and edit out little spots I want to be completely quiet. So micro edits and micro volume changes based on each clip. Yeah. I think I have a couple on my phone as well. I actually have a meter though. And also, since I've been mixing on 87 for such a minute, I have it kind of dialed on my system, so I know exactly which, increment to put it on my master out. So it's 87 because, I measured it with the fully mastered track. So that means when I'm going to go and mix and get it loud as possible, it'll be around 87. For anybody just coming through, a dB measuring app. So you want to measure, dB to 87 so you have the longest length of mixing possible without fatigue. So fatigue is not tired. It doesn't mean tired. It means a compression shift. So what happens when this phenomenon happens is that this little canal here has a muscle and it will inflame and pretty much get overstimulated, and that's triggered from your eardrum actually being overstimulated as well. The tympanic membrane. So this separates all that stuff. This is why you don't want to put a Q-tip into your ear, because you will mess with this membrane, and that directly influences your actual eardrum, which is the hidden hermit crab in your head. So yeah. So another thing, and this is, take it with a grain of salt. It is true though. And it's about specifically anything that influences your nervous system. So when you smoke, when you do any drug of any type, that means all stimulants of any kind, including psychedelics, it will influence your ears. THC will also influence your ears. You have a natural compression shift that happens when you start to influence your nervous system. So keep that in mind. If you mix while you're high, you might, mix out some stuff that shouldn't be there. That's kind of what happens. It's like you get too high, like everything gets red on your face, right? So obviously some other things are going to get inflamed as well. And there's a ton of information on this. I remember one time somebody was like, "You smoke weed, bro?" I'm like, "Yeah." Like, "Don't you know that fucks up your mixing?" Like, "Fuck you." What? Wait, how? Yeah. So you want to have the perfect natural perception, as Broken Reflection was saying, and if you're gonna go mix and master and stuff, I always do it sober. Easiest because it allows me to go and just knock that shit out. You know. Also, it allows me to be a little bit more specific on things. I'll not be as weird with my processing. If I'm sitting down just doing design, I don't give a shit about the mix. So I'm not going to worry about anything that influences my external auditory canals. Exactly. Smoke after, work now. So when you're doing stuff that requires, methodology and like a process, try to be sober while doing it. And then anything that's creative, you know, do whatever. I'm not going to judge. But also, just know that stuff happens to your body. That's not just other things, it's your actual eardrum shifting. So, a lot of things influence that. One thing that really helps your ears and ear health in general is to drink water, to be hydrated while mixing. Not only does it help your nervous system in general, so your blood flow is good, um, it also helps your stamina, mental stamina. So you're not going to be like in a little crusted shell in like 2 hours. Um, so stay hydrated. It's going to help all that stuff too. And then there's a bunch of meters on this, but if you actually work in an environment that's above 100 dB, you will be required by law to wear protective gear. So anybody on an aircraft runway, anything like that, any type of um, riveter, angle grinder, chainsaw, they're all going to be wearing some type of ear gear. Oh yeah, whippets are pretty bad for you. Um, but yeah, so we're not going to have a drug talk right now. But you know, that is just kind of like a general idea of what's going on here. I'm not going to go and tell you which drugs do what. I can say which drug is okay. Overall, weed is chill, and that's all I'll say. Okay, so keep this in mind. 87, so like halftime, but in dB form. All right, so this will also talk about all the other things that you should do just to clean your ears. So cleaning your ears, wiping it down and using Q-tips on the outer edges. If you have a ton of earwax in your ear, well, you can literally go to the doctor and get them flushed if you've never done it before in your life. One time I was trying to clean my ear. My buddy was like, "I have this hydrogen peroxide method." And then he did it. I let him do it. And then he clogged up my left ear and I couldn't hear anything for 2 days. So I had to go to the doctor and get it flushed. And good to go now. But I was annoyed. You know, and all this stuff as well. Pierced ears, make sure they're not infected. And if you have any other weird problems with your ears, just consistently, definitely see somebody. Also, another note that's not in here, I think it's actually is so safety issues and stuff. Um, Talking about no smoking, none of that. This is literally like fucking healthcare stuff. It's just gonna tell you you can have one beer a week, not even a full beer, half a beer. If you think about tequila, just think about taking a shot, and that's definitely enough. But also the pressure stuff. So this is literally related to anything pressure related. So including getting smacked in the head. So if you got smacked in the head, like someone smacked you and slapped you, and they hit your ear super hard, you can go deaf immediately from that. So if you're ever thinking about slapping somebody super hard, aim for the face. You don't want to make them deaf. That's a little bit too much, right? Um, yeah, and then drainage, as you know, really just the last resort. If you're really having some major problems, just go to your doctor and figure that out, because they'll definitely know exactly what to do. They also have tools to go and just look in your ear, see what's up. Oh, I'm sorry, your ear is not clogged. There's an earwig in there. It's a bug. I'm just kidding. Gross. That's my nightmare. Literally, my nightmare. But also, you know what's happening around you. Know how your environment is affecting you. I used to take the BART train every single day for about 4 years straight. Um, and the BART train is an hour and a half of 98 dB. How to measure 87 dB on headphones? So, Sonar works. Do that, as well as if you are mixing, and this is just another note because we got that question already, mix at half volume. Half volume is a general easy spot to mix on headphones. But get SonarWorks. SonarWorks will, create that kind of meter system for you. Nice. So yeah, definitely keep that in mind, and then just stay aware. If you're going to be a mixing engineer, anything, you just got to keep control of your ears. Say if you lost your hearing, it's not the end of the world. You know, you haven't lost an ear. If it still works, but now you have neg 50 in one ear, it's okay. I mix for some people. This one artist, she does a lot of sync licensing stuff, so it's just a lot of beats. But she's deaf in one ear, and so she mixes a lot of stuff and pans a lot of stuff because of that. But she's very aware of it, so she just sends the mixes off to me, and it's like, I have my husband check it, all this other stuff, sounds good, blah, blah, blah. Then, also, I've had another student, goes by the name alias Scripta, and he was neg 50 in both ears from birth. And he writes like deep dubstep and stuff. So he's just lived his entire life with hearing aids and works completely fine. Says working in headphones is chill, you know? So just kind of keep that in mind, that it's not the end of the world, say if you do lose your hearing for a bit. There's many ways around that, especially now. Also Beethoven, so you have no excuse. So that is where I'm going to leave off with my lecture today. There's a ton of shit I just talked about. Hours straight of just talking about dB. I'm sure if you have never taken the time to learn about dB, all that shit was brand new. Of course, yeah. And it is a good practice to use your monitors more than your headphones, mainly because of the perceived loudness effect. So with SonarWorks in headphones, it will kind of give you a little bit better of a representation of how the Fletcher Munson should sound out of your headphones. But your headphones by default will have some type of characterization to them. I use Audio-Technica M50X most of the time. And then I have Odyssey Mobius, 7.1 headphones. And those are really good. I love them. They're not really good for live stuff. Tried using them for this. Really, really buggy. But, all that stuff has its own metering systems. The M50Xs have a really good response. I've had these, and I've mixed and done a ton of shit on these headphones for the last 6+ years. So I trust them a lot. Yes, believe so. Odyssey. Yeah, because they have like a pronunciation, or Oddies. That's how I thought it was at first, Oddies, but pretty sure it's Odyssey. Glue compressor is a good way to check inputs. No. So just use the meter here. So say if you're, so glue compressor doesn't have any metering, so that's why you wouldn't want to do that. But say if you were doing some stuff like that, you can trim all these guys up. You can see less if you want to take out the I/O. And then you can see dBFS to -60 over here. So -6 is pretty easy to get to, +6 as well. You got floating point math, so it's all good. VU meter into my monitoring setup. VU meters are chill again, but they're still not as accurate just because of the needle. So they're kind of more like a peak RMS mixture. I believe there's a VU in max. I have a VU meter somewhere. I also have all this other shit open, so we'll pop into that in a second. Okay, so moving on. Any last questions before we move? Yeah, there definitely is one in max. I'm pretty sure it's just not called VU meter. It's probably meter 2. Okay, see that's what I. Yeah. So any other questions in chat? Throw them out right now. I think it's under the APIs. Anyways. Bollocks. Okay, so anyways here, let's actually check out this track before I go and start to dissect the amplitude and all that other stuff. This is not a fully mixed track, by the way. This is a whip. So just intro to drop into a vibe. So
We know you like that.
alrighty, a lot of stuff going on in this one. Yeah, let's kind of check this out here. Oh, man. There's a lot of visual processing going on here. All good. So I have a couple things set up on Insight. I'm able to monitor the actual level of each of the tracks here with this spectrogram. Literally just through a little plugin that I put on the end of each track called the relay. And this part of the trial as well. About to buy this. I just have been lagging because I use Insight, the regular one, for a lot of shit, and I'll just use meter tap. Meter tap is exactly the same thing, except now this also speaks to something else called the visual mixer. So we have Insight here, and then we can put a visual mixer pretty much in the chain. And it will read all my tracks, allow me to put them in the stereo field and mix them. So relay is pretty cool because it's literally it does what meter tap does without any of the you know, bureaucratic stuff, meaning typing shit, naming stuff. I don't want to have to name the tracks again, so this is really nice. So, Visual Mixer allows us to place individual pieces of our mix in the stereo field. This is a bad mix. I just put my snare in the left. Who am I? The Beatles? But yeah, so this is cool because you can set up different mixes, take snapshots of your mix. You can even automate some of this shit. Um, but yeah, it's super cool. So this turns it on right here. You just want to make sure all of them are on. And then put it on your master, and then you can just mix straight from the relay. But this relay speaks not only to Insight, but also to Neutron. So you can use any of the Neutron mix taps as well in tandem with the visual mixer from Relay. Okay, so let's talk about Insight and talk about what we're looking at here. So there's a bunch of stuff in Insight. You guys might have Isotope Insight 1. If you do, it's pretty much the same thing. There's a lot more, just way more updated, I guess. Looks really clean. This is the old Ozone 6, 7 look here. Actually, Ozone 5. This is Ozone 5 look. Alright, so we have a LUFS meter right here. Again, exactly the way I was telling you, it reads LUFS over time. Loudness units, full scale. So it's saying full scale, again, like DBFS, up to 0, so neg values. And it's saying integrated LUFS, how much space between loudest peak and lowest peak. How much dynamic range is there? So on this track specifically, very, very, very loud. But essentially it does the same thing. So this is actually taking up a ton of processing just because I'm using the relay right now. Normally it doesn't. Normally it's pretty chill. But I'm using relay on every track just so we can kind of use some of this stuff. So relay is something I will do as a volume pan thing as well. Sometimes I'll set up a general, you know, just a general mix and balancing kind of snapshot just for that, and then print out other, um, you know, like stems and all that other shit. Oh, is there a breakup in my voice right now? This happens specifically with the processor. It's literally just Insight setting it up and then destroying shit. Okay, so let me know if it's still getting choppy. It's kind of annoying. Okay, so when you're working with this, let's actually turn this on now.
Do you like that? 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 Do you like that?
Okay, so right here it's telling me my max LUFS, which is around neg4, and then my integrated LUFS, which is my consistent constant value, is around neg6. That's kind of what I'm looking for. Now I'm looking for a neg6 LUFS readout. I can go and push it a little bit harder. Let's check out the drop and see how that is kind of pushing the LUFS as well.
Do you like that? Do you like
Alright, so now we have neg6 on the intro, build up, all that stuff, and then I have neg3 on the drop. So it's loud, and then it gets just like uncomfortably loud. And that's kind of the point. So again, when you understand like what you're going for and what you're shooting for in terms of loudness, that should be kind of like your overall, you know, kind of jump off point. It's like I want it to be super loud for the club. It needs to integrate with my tracks like this. I want the sub to just be constant and really, really weighty. So that's kind of what I'll shoot for this. And then with summing, I'll go and split up each of these tracks. So the super distorted one is actually super high passed as well. There's pretty much no lows in it. And then I stack all the lows with this guy. And then I'm just kind of like literally just setting up a very basic kind of beat here. All right, so the couple more functions here. What is kind of limited in Insight 2 is you don't actually have as many, I guess, functions for fine tuning. So it's a little bit more basic on its actual options menu. So there's only a couple things in here, just to kind of like, well, I got the trial running right now, so I'm just going to be able to do basic stuff. Not really. It gives me the whole thing. I'm just going to turn it all off. But inside of each of these like windows here, we're going to have more functions. Each of them will have its own option menu. So meter-specific options here. We're going to find that. We can change our spectrum type into a different spectrum. Change our intelligibility. Intelligibility is pretty interesting. It's actually a new meter just for Insight 2. And what it's doing is it's allowing me to go and say, is this able to be heard in the mix? Intelligibility is, does it sum to the point where you can't hear it? And because we have each of these tracks monitored by relay, we can actually kind of see that. So listener environment, meaning high noise if I'm in a club, high noise if I'm in medium noise, maybe, you know, mixing on headphones in some random place. Low noise would be monitors in your studio. So I'm doing the serum tracker, which is the main sound here. So obviously it's going to go way above that, so you can hear. Okay, so I'm monitoring the operator here. It's saying that I'm not getting enough signal from that. So I'll probably push that a couple dB just because I wanted to go and sit on the low end of the mix a little bit harder. So I can actually like pull the mix a little bit more just with the low end. And I'm literally getting that from reading this intelligibility. So the low point over here, we want to see cross and kind of center in the middle here. So by looking at those 2 meters, I can literally see that I need to pull down my serum by about 3 dB and then push this by about maybe 2, around there. So I'm processing these separately. I'm also gain staging, so I can process effectively and it doesn't like make it unintelligible for the actual sound, but I want it to be distorted. Okay, so kind of moving on into a couple other things in here. Let's take off all of these guys. So remember, intelligibility, loudness, this is going to be our meters, where we do not have a stereo meter. That's going to be in our levels here. So we can see levels right here, left and right channel. We can see where it's clipping off to or wherever. Don't believe I'm actually mastering this really at all. So I would always put it to 0.1 because I do not like to hit 0 in a digital environment at all. Also don't like Alright, so I'm probably going to push this a little bit harder when I go and master this track. But, you know, just to kind of check out where this stuff is at, we have a very exponential scale here, so it goes all the way down to -50 and then to -infinity. So, you know, if you're reading something that's a little bit more, you know, quiet, I guess, you can change your loudness to linear or different conversions of the meter. You can also do a K system meter. K system is all based off of loud, sorry, not loud, life and sync stuff for like film, TV, all those standards. So in music, there really is no standard. It's just who's going to set the standard, really, next for the loudest track. And that can be a good thing. It mostly is a bad thing because it mostly is a losing battle because there's only so loud you can go. It's neg zero. Once we can get into 32-bit waveforms everywhere, maybe plus zero. But right now, no. All right, so last little thing in the loudness section here is the targets. So we have a bunch of different targets for mediums. So these are a lot of like European standards, American standards over here. Then we have Netflix has its own standards as well. So it's going to set these targets. So meaning that this is where we want to shoot for 0. So if we had a ceiling, we'd want to pull this down to about -2, -3. But also K metering is really good for that, so K12 as well. So usually I just use this kind of like on a general kind of meter here. But also the loudness curve, if I'm shooting for something specific, then I'll set it for the tolerance I'm looking for. So say this is like a really loud club track, specifically for house, this shit can get super loud, and bass house definitely goes off really well when it's loud. Shoot for neg3. So neg3 is going to come from a lot of different places in my track. Mostly it's going to come from the low mid-range on my main bass. How much sustain I have on my main bass and the momentary kicks and snares that can come in. Alright, so I'm getting the target that I'm shooting for. It's mainly because I am compressing other stuff up and kind of pushing it to that max volume. Also, saturating a little bit. I'm doing almost no drive here. But the saturation and compression here really changes the noise floor in general. Like if I just turn this off. Literally pushed it 4 dB lufs. So 4 dB lufs is a huge push. It's, you know, for some people they can just be like smashing their heads against the wall, and this is something I just know from having taught a ton of people how to master lufs. And this is like a bunch of producers, like larger producers, because they just don't understand it. It's a very secretive thing. They just slide in my DMs and say, hey, explain how to master real quick. And, you know, it's like most of the problem with pretty much everybody is how do I get that jump from neg6, neg7 to neg3 without destroying the track? And that's through a lot of saturation, also mixing. So I have a lot of the step up that I need to get the loud master happening in my mix already. And so when I just throw in something that basically compresses it, I can literally just shoot up 6 dB. And it's not even affecting the overall clarity of each piece of the track. Once it starts to distort and compress too much on the saturator, really I don't want any saturation coming out of this. I want a little bit more warm lows and then also a little bit more representation in the highs and stuff. But really that's it. So also have a couple other things here. LRA, this is not going to be something you use at all really, because this is for A-weighted metering. So you want to just kind of like keep that normal. It's going to give you a readout as well, but it is not necessary. It's not important for what we're doing right now. So we're going to get more into this when we talk about mastering for TV, mastering for things, mastering for that. Because I've had to master for so many different mediums that it's made me have to learn all this other stuff. Okay, so now sound field. This is really cool because I use this for a bunch of stuff. If we were in 5.1, we would also have a different meter just for 5.1, so we can see the 5.1 field. But do I use soft clippers at all while mastering? Yes. I have soft clipping on saturator. So I will clip specific types of EDM and all that shit. So I don't really kind of like hold any like limitations for myself. The only time I limit myself really is when I'm actually setting up, you know, professional stuff, for submission, for assets or whatever, or because when I send it to them, I want it to be the last interaction really. Besides, all right, good to go. Here's your money. So you just gotta be able to execute that and then really just give people what they want without them asking for it, because that's how you get repeat business, especially as a designer or composer, especially too. If you know how to master for K12, K6, K10, K14, then you'll be able to set up tracks that are like minutes long, and then sell them to different like TV companies, sync licensing companies, as well as production managers and stuff. So that's kind of necessary for that in order for you to get that type of consistent work. Like, because somebody will listen to a track and say, "Hey, this is great," but it's like mastered to like neg 3. Can you turn it the fuck down? And then it's just having that you know interaction really that kind of like will bar you from more work later, because they're going to look for somebody who just knows what they're doing out the gate. So that's something to keep in mind. It's like if you ever heard horror stories about people in the studio just getting fired on the spot for doing one thing wrong, 1000% true. And I've seen it happen. Like, I worked at Fantasy Studios for a bit here in Berkeley, and this dude's had new strings on his guitar. It was a giant session for a giant jazz band, and he was making a little bit too much noise on his frets on his guitar. And we mic'd this guy up with like a U47 and a ribbon mic. It's really, really, really good mics. And he was like, stop the recording with 19 players and 30 mics, dude. And fires the guitarist because he heard string noise, like on the spot. He just says, "We're cutting the guitar part. You can go home." That's the kind of shit that'll happen, And it's like, say if I in that session decide to say, "Hey, engineer, why don't you try routing it to the reverb chamber too?" Like, "Hey, uh, you know, assistant engineer, at what point did you get a voice? What point did you decide I'm going to start talking in this $20,000 session for a world-renowned engineer, giving him advice?" Kidding? Not that dumb. So yeah, it's like you don't say that kind of stuff, and you just got to be very prepped for people being so under the gun they're ready to fire at anybody who does anything wrong. So that's just kind of the industry in general, though. It's not just the music industry; it's the entertainment industry at large. There's a saying in Hollywood that goes, "If you're on time, you're late. If you're early, you're on time. If you're late, you are fired." There's no second chances. Why? Because this shit's right now. You're late for your set or whatever. It's not gonna. Nobody's waiting on you. You know, we're just gonna move forward. That's just kind of how it works. Um, but yeah, so it's just good stuff to keep in mind as well, I guess. About like if you're thinking about getting into this field and doing really professional shit, you actually have to hold yourself to a professional standard without anybody telling you. Because if you're being told to do that from a non-homie, like if there's a homie in the industry who's hooking you up with a gig, it's like, "Hey, dude, super good. Before I send it, can you like turn it down a little bit?" Be like, "Oh yeah, sure, no problem. Oh yeah, master it to this standard too. This is what my dudes look for." It's like, "Oh, okay, no problem." You're not gonna get that from a non-homie. You're gonna get either zero response at all. That's the normal. Zero response if they don't want it. Um, But if they do want it, like, "Oh, it's great. We need it. Too loud." They'll just ask you for too loud once. If you send it back with it's still too loud, then they're probably just going to move on because they don't want to go back and forth with somebody that they don't even know, didn't hire. It's all the stuff. It's like if they're asking for Steven Tyler of Aerosmith to come in and sound design the thing, you'd be like, "Oh, just hold on. Let me learn how to use Massive." Like, "Yeah, okay, Steven Tyler, we asked you to come here." But yeah, it doesn't matter. Anyways, so sound field here, spectrum, spectrogram, the last few pieces of this that you kind of need to understand. For those of you who stick around, you can dip out if you don't want to hear about the industry and shit, I guess. All right, so the spectrogram is probably my favorite thing in this. Why? Because it allows me to patch in each individual track, or I can just do the output as well. Sound field, very self-explanatory. X and Y, left to right.
Massive, we know you like that.
So you can hear it's a little bit more in the right channel just from the general thing going on there, but we can actually see where our subs are in this track. For whatever reason, that was panned a little bit. Cool, that looks good too. So pretty much what I like to do when I'm using a sound field is how do my lows stack with my mids to my highs. So the image I'm looking for, like this, beyond this triangle here, this is all like behind you sound, phased out left and right, super far left or super far right. So if I'm doing like really, really bright highs, I'll probably push for this range out here, mid-range right here, and then sub either straight line or a very, very small, movement left and right here. So I'll probably have way more space with my main stereo sound. Okay, so kind of the same deal here. Kind of wide, I run it through a bunch of different reverbs and all that other shit, so I can hear a lot of the sound. You can also take the relay and put it in a different point of the chain if you want to see that here in a different way. But yeah, so the sound field's cool. Just seeing how everything sums. You want middle channel to be lows, and then mids to highs. So that's kind of how you want to set up your mix in terms of pan. So like pan stuff should be happening left to right. Depends on kind of what you're going for, I guess, in terms of like a stereo field. The spectrum here is kind of cool. I like this way more than most other spectrums just because it's really, really high resolution. So that means it is really quick, really accurate. Some spectrums kind of blend and stuff, and this one's really, really accurate. So.
Do you like that? Do you like that? Do you like that?
Okay, so you can right-click on this and see different styles of meters. By default, it should be around either linear or mel, which gives you kind of a representation of the lows here. Personally, I like the logarithmic. Gives me a better representation of the low mid-range. So it lets me see more frequencies here. You can also zoom in as well by scrolling up or down. So scroll down allows you to zoom in. And then do the same thing on your meter over here.
Do you like that? 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 Do you like that?
Man, processing on this, not chilling. Okay, so what it's giving me right now is, and what I'm looking at, with the mel, it kind of gives me the best representation of a Fletcher-Montague curve because it gives me a lot of room for lows and doesn't just bunch them all up here and just peak them out. Because that's what happens on linear, is you see all your mid-range super well, but then it bunches up all your lows and just puts them into one giant peak in the low. So it's really, really confusing to look at. So again, mel or log. And then you have different logs as well. Flat logarithmic is a little bit more exponential on the low mid-range. This is actually kind of the readout that you'd see inside of an EQ.
Do you like that?
but there's a lot of room for these lows here, almost a little too much. So logarithmic is kind of the go-to. Then specific settings in here, you can change the type of readout, so the linear or third octave, critical, or full octave.
You like that?
Those are going to be all like sine bank resonators. So they're all a little bit more high resolution or lower resolution.
You like that? 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 You like that?
All right, so when we're talking about FFT and all that stuff, the FFT window size is going to take more samples and a higher resolute sound here. So if I take a lower size here, it's going to kind of blend it a little bit more. 4,000 is a good.
You like that?
512 will also bunch up a bunch of stuff in your lows. It'll kind of change the way the spectrum will even read the signal. So 4096 is a good default. Sometimes I'll pull down the overlap to 0 so I can see just anything happening in real time. So there's no actual like problem with that. Okay, so finally we have the spectrogram here. All right, so the spectrogram is pretty much going to be, you know, like a cascading spectrogram, but it's also 3D. I can also make it not 3D. There's a few other functions in here as well. So, yeah, it's probably the most complex.
You like that?
So grayscale is the new like default in this, but we can change this to multicolor. And so if we're gonna do like a general output, like you know, global output here.
You like that? 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 You like that?
It's like multicolor 1 or 2, kind of flips the range here. So red is quiet and blue is loud. Overlap, same thing with the spectrum, where it overlaps the readout, kind of blends between it. Level of detail is going to give you different level of detail on the peaks.
You like that? You like that? You like that?
So that's pretty interesting. I usually keep it about medium or low. So zoom here will allow us to zoom the whole thing, and we can change the height of the waveforms. So we can do the same thing by scrolling with option.
You like that? You like that? You like that?
So you can make it 2D by taking the height all the way down.
You like that? You like
If you so wish, and then change the length of the spectrogram to history length. You can take a snapshot of up to 2 minutes. So this is really cool if you're going to go and try to look at your entire track through a spectrogram.
You like that? 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 You like that?
All right, so this is cool because I can go and take a snapshot here, but then also it kind of lets me look at what's going on after I stop. So it's not going to cut this off until 2 minutes. So it's kind of cool. I can even listen to it here, go and listen to it.
You like that? You like that? You like that? You like that?
Okay. So this is the general way to use it. Also, if you don't hold down Control or leave its Alt on Windows, you can move it around like this. They used to have a little configuration for that, but not exactly. Then if you want to quickly switch it from 3D to 2D, which takes it out of this like floating space here, just puts it in the hard 2D version, you get the scroll speed option.
Do you like that? Do you like that? Do you like that? Do you like that? Do you like that?
Okay, so we have all that stuff. Alright, so now on our relays, we have all of our outputs here kind of like set up. I can turn off my main output, which is, you know, the master input. Or I can just like turn on individual things I want to see at once.
Do you like that? Do you like that? Do you like that? Do you like that?
So I can easily see where everything's lining up here. And say if like I wanted to hear my break more, and the break was too quiet. The break is actually at a good level here. I wouldn't be able to see any of the yellow. The yellow would be gone. So less yellow, less almond break. More yellow, more. So I can see the balance between my kick and my main bass as well, right here. And this is actually 100% my workflow when I'm mixing, because I like to see whether or not the frequency range is extending below, you know, a certain point, like 100 hertz on my main bass if I'm layering this up. Okay, so looks pretty good because I can see all of the purple here, and then the blue is actually sustained. What I want to see more of, though, is I want to see more sustain on the purple on the lows. So I'd probably go and cut off a little bit more here, and then expand a little bit more on the lows on my sub. Actually look at this in 3D. Much more usable when I'm not stringing. Let's see, is there general frame limiting here, like if there was? Nah, there is not. That was something I was actually kind of bummed about. That's fine. Okay, so just kind of how it works. Really, really simple with relay. Again, with meter tap, you do exactly the same thing, but with this, now you have like a ton of like, I guess, flexibility with it, and it's really, really quick. So highly useful when trying to balance things in your mix. You can literally see them stacked up next to each other, and just see kind of like. Alright, so when I'm actually monitoring lower frequencies and stuff, I will actually go and isolate that a little bit more by switching into logarithm code, so I can actually see it. So I can see the crossover between my main bass, which is here, and my sub, which is there, which is the purple. Yeah, I can show you how to make some bass house at some point, Galva. It's a stupid track for dumb people. Okay, so that's a lot of the info for this week. Really, like, metering is about understanding how LUFS works, understanding how to kind of change increments of sound and how to measure that change. So without that, this becomes a lot less usable. So you don't really know what you're looking at. You're just saying, oh yeah, it says it's that loud. Cool. You know, so you can literally do the same exact thing by just looking at, you know, your music. it's hitting 0. That's what we know. So pretty much what we want to do is we want to use the metering systems to be able to create dynamics, create kind of change in a lot of places, and then also kind of maximize like the little things about it that really make it usable. Um, like relay is something that's going to be usable for a ton of shit because you can go and put it on every single track, like I'm going right now and deleting it. Um, and then you can also use it in Neutron as well as a mix device. I use it as a visual mixer, as I already showed you. Um, if you're still confused on how Insight works, which is why I didn't really like, I guess, outline that manual as I have with a ton of other manuals in the past, because I felt like it was so mismatched and disjointed that I feel like it was actually overcomplexifying what it does, and you probably wouldn't understand Insight as well as you should be without that. Yes, you can use it with Ozone 9. So Ozone 9 integrates directly with Relay as well. So you can use metering functions with that. You can also use it with RX. So Relay kind of works with all of just like push the space bar as I was explaining that. Okay. So a ton of stuff to check out in here, a ton of stuff to just kind of get to know, I guess. So if you haven't been using this stuff, start using it. Again, with your, you know, your mixes and all that stuff, and just mixing now. You should be thinking about how loudness is affecting your mix. Loudness does affect your mix. Loudness affects how you mix in general. So when you're mixing, like in my headphones right now, I'm at half volume. So this shit is probably super loud, you know, for anybody that's at really, really loud volume in their headphones. So I never listen to my headphones loud unless I'm just kind of doing some sound design and don't really care for a bit. But for the most part, if you're doing stuff loud, limit yourself to about 45 minutes to an hour. To be honest, you will, just by default, be limited to that point, just because you're kind of tired. Like after an hour, you'd be like, oh, I need a break on my ears, you know, and that's directly because you're fatigued.